I originally had this as 9 to 11, so I'm feeling pressure at the end. I might have to dip out early, so I don't mind driving because then I can whoosh, whoosh.
Okay, we're set to go.
All right. Greetings. It's September 9th, 2020. This is a regular meeting of the Arches Hotspot Regional Coordinating Committee. The time is now 9:34. Calling this meeting to order on behalf of the chair, Curtis Wells, who will be joining us shortly. First up is citizens to be heard. Did we have any citizens comment?
Nope, no comment.
No comment. We have next up approval of minutes. We have minutes from July 30th, the regular meeting. Any discussion on, or I would entertain a motion to approve those.
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next up is report of and discussion of public engagement efforts. Lisa Church, Moab City Communications and Engagement Manager.
Good morning. I have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm just going to share my screen with y'all, and we can discuss this as we go along.
Great.
Okay. Just give me a second here.
And there was also a PDF in the packet with the survey response.
Yes, that's correct. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. So we want to talk today about the survey itself and also just some future public engagement. So we'll start with that. So the survey, we had 213 responses. It was open for just over 2 weeks, and 207 of those responses were local residents. And just as an explanation, what we were looking for in the survey were clear ideas of community preferences within the parameters that were currently under consideration by the committee. And specifically in this survey, it was for the off Main Street parking that we were doing, that you guys had been looking at. So in the survey, there were a couple of questions. One was, we started with the project goals that had been identified by the committee. Can you guys see that slide? I can't tell what you're seeing, so.
Yeah, we can see that.
Great, okay. And so these project goals were provided to us by Matt Hancock from the subcommittee. And we asked residents to rank them in order of what they perceived as the importance of those project goals. And you'll see that the particular goals that they thought were most important were, number one out of those goals, encouraging greater pedestrian, bicycle, and transit activity. And that had the top ranking. Creating attractive and appealing streetscapes where people want to gather with aesthetics that reflect Moab's unique character, and scale that is consistent with Moab's master plan, ranked number 2 out of those. And from there we had improved traffic flow as number 3, and the least effective, or the least important, according to residents who took the survey, was more effectively linking businesses with recreational opportunities and downtown, other downtown aesthetics. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble reading my notes here.
Hey, Lisa, question for you.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I saw the percentages and so forth, get that, but how did you rank them? I mean, there was on the far right-hand side of the tables, there was a numerical rank, but how do you compute that?
Well, actually, the survey program itself does that for us. It takes all of the responses and then provides these graphs and rankings for you. So it shows you, there are actually in the survey that was included in your packet, you also have the specific numbers of people who had ranked each one in what order. So this is scientific. It's not something that I, actually have to go through and do.
Okay, well, I didn't imply that. That's fine. I'm just curious as to what I'm a mathematician, so I'm just
Sure.
always curious how these things work. So thank you.
Yeah, I didn't include those specific numbers here because it's a little laborious, but you do have them in your packet, and I can open that survey up and we can look at it if you'd like before I finish today.
No problem. Thank you.
Sure. We also asked a question, and the reason we asked this question, which may seem redundant in a certain way, but we asked residents to rank the priorities based on their perspectives and or the priorities that they, would like to see as project goals. And so they chose I'm sorry, hang on a second. They chose making the area more pedestrian friendly, relieving traffic congestion, improving traffic flow, making the downtown core bicycle friendly, aesthetics in how the parking areas are designed, and preserving neighborhood character in that order. So there's some crossover there, but there's some interesting takeaways that we'll discuss in a couple of minutes about this. We also had them rank their preference for the various parking styles that were being considered. And you'll see from this that angled parking and median parking had the highest scores. Perpendicular parking was fairly close to median parking, and parallel parking was obviously the least favorite type of parking for folks. And that came in at like a 1.83 score as opposed to 3.41 for angled. So it seems like, if angled parking is what the committee is looking at, in those side streets in downtown core, that the majority of the people who responded to this survey actually prefer angled parking and median parking. And those are two things that you were looking at specifically. We also asked, what do you believe should be a focus for creating parking on side streets? And we gave them the parameters. And at the very beginning of the survey, we also gave them a map to show them the streets that you all were looking at. And in this particular case, the number one response was developing parking areas with aesthetic amenities like benches or places where people would gather. Number two came out maintaining neighborhood character. Number three was creating dedicated bicycle lanes in all those areas. Number four was increasing the number of parking stalls. Number five was bicycle parking. Number six was creating parking lots. And number seven was folks who wanted us to leave parking as it was on the side streets.
Lisa, that's question number 4, correct?
That is, yes, question number 4.
Because on this information in the packet, it shows that pedestrian friendly is number 1 and relieving traffic congestion is number 2.
Yeah, actually, hang on. Let me go back here for a second.
Maybe that was question 5.
I think it was question 5, Karen. I'm sorry. They weren't exactly in these slides that I've created are not exactly in the order. And I'm sorry, I have to go back to slideshow. So just a second. So, yeah, so this slide shows, I believe, number 4 and the very first question. And so the slide I was just showing you here is actually question number 5. You see that in your packet?
Oh, gotcha. Yep.
Okay. So here are a few takeaways from the survey. In general, respondents are amenable to all 4 types of parking currently under consideration, and they ranked angled parking and median parking the highest. Parallel parking was clearly the least preferred. Improving pedestrian safety and walk-friendly aesthetic characteristics ranked high for residents, as did relieving congestion and improving traffic flow. And whoops. And finally, most respondents did not see increasing the number of parking stalls as a top priority in either question. It ranked 4th in question number 4 and 5th in question number 7, or in question number 5 out of 7 priorities. Do you have any questions about that? I thought that was an interesting result. It was sort of surprising because people have been talking about parking so much. You know, certainly the committee has been focused on it.
Yeah, so Evan, if I may interject a little bit of a philosophy question here, I guess. The reason we're considering off-street parking is because the other project alternatives weren't really UDOT's cup of tea, so to speak. In other words, the idea is that if we can create a number of new parking stalls that are cost less, no more than what the parking garage would have cost, then UDOT is amenable to funding all that as a way of relieving Main Street congestion and expediting throughput for traffic through town. I mean, that's the main reason we've been considering it. That's my opinion anyway. So given that the residents who don't really necessarily have that perspective or that constraint, I guess my question for the committee is pushing the number of parking stalls up something we would really want to do? I mean, because if there's nothing else, I mean, suppose that the residents said decidedly, you know, it's not our cup of tea, even if it's UDOT's cup of tea. So that leaves us thinking, well, now what? So I don't know if there's any other opinions on that or not.
I think that's well put, Mike. You know, my thoughts on that is it would be different if this was you know, an initiative that was kind of launched by the city of Moab or Grand County with our funding. So it is kind of a balancing act there where this isn't our funding, it is a gift from, you know, from the state transportation agency department. And the gift has there's legislative intent from the legislature to the agency of what this money is to be used for. You know, and primarily we're talking about the reduction of congestion. And in this circumstance in our community, what UDOT is saying is their preference or opinion on how to reduce congestion is to, you know, create more parking downtown. And so if the respondents to the survey are going to say that's not our priority, you know, in my opinion, it's well, fair enough, but that doesn't mean that it's not a good thing, and that increasing parking stalls isn't a good thing. And for this particular program and the criteria that is attached to it, that's the name of the game.
If I may respond to Mike, I agree with what Curtis says, but I feel like part of what we've been considering, part of the appeal of it is to increase landscaping and other things besides parking. And so these survey results reinforce to me that we should continue to pursue that in as much as we can, since we don't know how many parking stalls exactly we need or yet what the cost per stall is. And so continue to push on that and try to maximize for the other things that we've identified and citizens have said they want. And I think the survey results are good support for that, within the constraints of still meeting the higher level goals.
Yeah, that's well said.
Okay, well, thank you for your opinions. We can move on from my question. Thank you.
Okay. Just looking at some of the general comments, and frankly, there were a lot of them, so which is great. I think we had 122 people give us general comments out of this is the very last question on the survey. Many of them, and this is just a very quick, because this is not an analysis that the survey program does, but many of the respondents expressed that median parking could slow traffic. And several of them said also that they like the median parking outside of City Hall. But some of them also expressed concerns about pedestrian and bicycle safety associated with median parking, especially if people parked, you know, in the middle of the street and then had to cross the street to get to the sidewalks across the way. Several of the comments also focused on the need to create parking for oversized vehicles. And I know that's one of the potential other projects that y'all are thinking about. And that had to do really with like oversized vehicles parking in people's neighborhoods or causing congestion in streets, et cetera, you know, when they were like particularly loading and unloading, but also some of the larger vehicles that visitors are bringing to town. And this was interesting, I thought. So almost an even number of people who submitted comments, and that was 11 for and 10 against, spoke specifically about the previously considered parking structure. 11 people asked why we didn't just do a parking structure, and 10 people said they didn't want to see a parking structure under any circumstances. Improving aesthetics, planting more trees, and possibly including green infrastructure in the downtown core was mentioned multiple times. There were a total of 15 of those. And so those are just some really basic takeaways from those comments, but I think it might help y'all to delve more deeply yourselves into reading those. And when I have a little more time, I mean, we closed the survey just a week ago at the end of last Wednesday. So going through all of those and trying to create some kind of matrix for them would take more time than I had before this meeting. But they're definitely worth a read. So you might find some interesting things in there. Anybody have any questions about this? Okay. So now we're moving on to what's next. And these are some options for public engagement as additional, and then the final project or projects are identified by the committee. And our thought is that we'll do at least one more survey and possibly two, depending on how many of those other projects there are, or how quickly it's all put together into one package that we could present out in a survey and ask questions about. And then also the question would be, how will the committee provide input on that survey content before we complete it and get it out to the public? We're continuing to do community updates, and frankly, our social media was pretty effective. I mean, 213 responses was a good number for such a short period of time for the survey to be out, I think, compared to other surveys that have been done at different times over the last several years from the city. As these things are scheduled, as we have surveys and public meetings scheduled, we'll continue to use direct email lists, social media, and the city hotspot page for public engagement. We need to know from the committee if you want to do a virtual town hall or open house, or even if you want to do one in person. Just keeping in mind that like masks and social distancing would be required for that, based on the requirements, the regulations that are in place in Grant County right now. It might be possible for you to consider doing neighborhood meetings in specific areas on some of these side streets, like 100 North, especially where there's some mix of residential and commercial, and 100 South as well. It may be difficult due to the COVID-19 restrictions, but I mean, it's possible if that's a preference that you all have. And we will continue updating the hotspot page as the committee identifies new projects and recommendations. The ones that are under consideration right now are up there in a very general sense, but as more details are available, then we'll develop those out a little more. Any questions about any of this?
Do you need feedback from the committee as to whether or not you post the results of the survey on the webpage, or are you planning to do that? What's the status?
That would be up to you all. I'd be happy to post the results. We can post a PDF that's exactly like the one you received, or we can do it in some other form if you prefer. How do y'all feel about that? Yes? I have a yes from Mike. I assume that's a yes from you, Caitlin, right?
Yes.
Okay. Curtis?
Yeah, so Lisa, would you like some feedback now on how we might actually implement another public review? Because Karen and I talked a little bit about this yesterday. For example, one of the ideas she threw out, and similar things from myself. For example, a town hall in a relatively big venue where people can space out comfortably, still social distance, and still attract a good crowd. We could still present a slideshow and so forth. And so, for example, I mean, there's a Grand Center, there's Star Hall, there's even the market's a little smaller and so forth. So how do you guys feel about that? I really like the idea of having people sit down in a big group if we can safely do so, because I think we'll get better participation that way than we would trying to do it online. What do you guys think?
I'm going to go ahead to my next and final slide because those very questions are right there, Mike. So thank you.
Okay, very good.
Yeah. So yes, these are decisions that we need the committee to make, and ideally some of them hopefully can be made today or at least within the next week, because we are getting into pretty much a time crunch. And one of those is, do you want to hold a public meeting or open house? And if so, who on the committee will serve as the host of that meeting? It sounds like Mike would like to do it in person. How does the rest of the committee feel about that?
I'm not sure. I can actually see, having an in-person town hall discouraging people from attending right now. But I realize that the alternative, the virtual town hall, is kind of a different animal altogether. So I'm not going to have really strong, feelings about it. I think that the virtual town hall, with the opportunity to kind of go through slides and, seems attractive, but I'm open to either.
What about doing both? I mean, I feel like we have, the venues that we could have the spacing. I mean, even at the Sun Court, if we wanted to. I mean, Congressman Curtis was at City Hall yesterday having a town hall, and I mean, that was a last minute change to do it inside, and it seemed like it went fine. I don't know how many people participated. I mean, at this point, I just, for us to get engagement, I mean, we have to be, this is, precarious times for everyone. And and that's the challenge of, during COVID is, offering as many options and possibilities as necessary. So, yeah, I mean, if we had a system for a meeting outside or in one of the bigger venues and had examples of what we're trying to accomplish, and then, potentially that could just be parlayed into a virtual meeting as well. So
there were only maybe 8 or 10 people in the audience at Congressman Curtis's indoor event yesterday. It was very lightly attended, and still that used maybe more than half of the seats available in City Hall with the spacing. I wonder about using the pavilion at the Old Spanish Trail Arena as an alternate space that is large, well ventilated, and covered. And then possibly using the inflatable screen that the city has for slides. I'm not sure if that'll be quite big enough with physical distancing, but just as a hybrid.
Better hope it's warmer that day than it is today, is all I can say.
Well, it's likely that it will be.
I agree.
One of the things y'all should keep in mind is if we do an outdoor venue like that, and I think it's a great idea, but if we do an outdoor venue like that, we won't be able to stream the meeting easily, and we won't be able to record it very easily unless we do something like with just an iPhone and stream it on Facebook or YouTube or something like that. So it'll be a little more challenging based on what you're used to, but we can try to figure out the parameters of that, as quickly as possible if that's what you decide you want to do.
Well, and I think I like Karen's idea of maybe doing both. So if we have one virtually, we kind of give the same presentation, so that will be available on YouTube, forever. And people who don't feel comfortable coming in person can participate that way. And then we have an in-person one, where we realize we probably can't capture the same, that exact moment, but basically we're making sure that the information is still somewhere available to the public.
Yeah, we can probably capture it. Like I said, we can set up, a tripod and capture it using an iPhone, and which we could stream directly to YouTube or Facebook. We'll just have to figure out the logistics of that, and based on the size of the crowd and how we'll focus all of that. But it is possible to do. It just won't be as, there might be some sound issues and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And the one limitation for an in-person meeting, for example, I have some employees who are high risk that I'm not going to require to attend the in-person meeting. So we might have to do them, it might be committee members and other staff to do that kind of work. And we would just need, what we're asking for today, to have 2 events, we need to populate that with members of. And I guess we need commitments from the folks here that will be able to have, one of you emceeing and some of you answering questions in the crowd too, to the crowd, to do this engagement. So that's another thing we'd like to ensure you're willing to do.
So do y'all feel like you need to have some time to sort of, think amongst yourselves and share your thoughts with each other to make some decisions? If we're going to do, especially 2 public meetings, but even one, since you have a deadline of November 1st, right, to get your final plan to UDOT, is that correct?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So we're thinking that you probably will want to do those meetings in early October sometime.
Beginning of October, that first week probably. So we have time to digest the information, and the committee has a chance to make a decision based on the information.
Yeah, all that sounds good to me, Lisa. I don't want to wait too long because I'm already looking ahead to the phase after that where hopefully we would take sufficiently well-defined concept and Chuck's and Matt's concepts and so forth, and go out for RFPs with them and find out how much all this is going to cost, because that's another major milestone. So I don't want to wait too long to get to that point.
Do any of you have like a date or some dates in mind to choose from that you would like to try to schedule this for? The first one?
I think the first, maybe the second week of October would be good. That would give us time, to still hold a meeting the first week of October. Not to say that we still won't have a meeting for the second half of September, but it seems to me like the second week of October would be a good target. And I'm actually open to doing, like Karen suggested, to doing both, having an in-person and a virtual town hall open house if everyone's interested in that and we think we can pull that off. I don't see any reason to not approach it that way.
That sounds good to me. I'm amenable to that. And Lisa, if I may suggest now, unless you really want me to wait till a little bit longer, I'd like to lay down the ground rules for the people who are running this presentation to focus the conversation not too widely and not too narrowly. I mean, if we say nothing and we just throw out all the original 15 options, then we'll have the same old beat dead horse discussion all over again. We need to narrow things down for the audience as to what, give them some guidelines about why we've narrowed things down the way we did, that the audience may not necessarily be familiar with. And that'll help us keep the discussion focused, and at the same time, collect some useful opinion about what people would want to do. And that'll take a little bit of thought. I think we ought to talk about that, because whoever outlines all that can guide, the plan one way or the other. So it has to kind of be nonpartisan, if you will. But,
I think that's exactly right, Mike. And hopefully by the time these public meetings are being done, you'll have identified the full range of the projects that you're hoping you'll be able to get funded. So, I mean, the way I see this, really, the committee itself will be making the decision about, what you're going to talk about. I mean, I can help you put together some, presentation boards or presentations if you want, but the content of all of that really needs to come from you all, because it is your baby,
Yeah, I think those are good points. And more generally, just really identifying what the information that we want is and how we're going to use it, or whether really the intent of this is more to provide information to the public rather than to get it from them. Because in terms of providing a neutral facilitator, my understanding was that there was going to be a more detailed level of design, presuming it's funded, for any of these projects after they're funded, at which point there's money for design, and whoever the design team is could then run those meetings. And they might have the more experience in being a third party and more perceived as neutral. They might be in a better position to do that. But then that doesn't necessarily meet our intent for having more public engagement in advance of making the decision. But it seems like we might be making that decision anyway. And so I don't know if this town hall might be as much about optics as about information gathering, to be frank.
You can sort of approach it as an open house, which is really more of a providing information than, necessarily seeking feedback. And that actually would be my recommendation based on what you just said, Kaylin, so that you have the various projects that you're considering available to the public, and you talk to them about why you're considering those projects. They may still have feedback they want to provide, but that's not really, it doesn't sound like that's really going to be the point of doing the the open house or public meeting at this point.
I wasn't necessarily saying that was the point. I was just reflecting one possible reality of this process, but I might be in minority of one on that.
What else do we need to decide here before we continue on? Do we want to set a date, a target date right now? I offer the second week of October. Is everybody copacetic with that, or what are your thoughts?
The only thing that I'm concerned about is if we're looking at November 1st, that's 2 weeks. I mean, but I guess it kind of depends on what happens today. Like, I just feel like, you know, we've been meeting. I mean, is this our project? Because if that's the case, like, then we need to go forward and try to come to you know, a balance between what UDOT would appreciate seeing in terms of, you know, offering more parking areas and what our community is looking at in, you know, pedestrian, bike friendly community space. So, I mean, are we still in this discussion of like, this is the project? Because,
well,
I
I
mean,
think I don't, we haven't gotten to the you know, the bulk of that yet. And I think we need to anticipate having to meet quite a bit more regularly between now and November 1st. You know, the last, I don't want to get too far off subject, but the last 2 months, we've kind of put our staff to work, giving them time to kind of grind through things. And we're at a point now where we're going to have to start wrapping this all up. And that's likely to take, you know, quite a bit of deliberation and time. So,
Yeah. And the open house it doesn't have to just be about off Main Street parking. It can be about the suite of projects. So I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. We just need to sort of do more engagement. If it's ultimately, this is your selected project you want to go with, if you want to throw a couple of them into the hopper, that's available. We're just like, we need to be doing some public facing, you know, events. So when do you want to do them and who's going to be there, you know, helping moderate? Yeah.
Why don't we, committee, why don't we kind of move on to the next item and kind of get through projects, and then at the tail end of this meeting, or like, you know, under, you know, future considerations or something, we can start to discuss a time frame, you know, for the town hall. Or it doesn't have to be decided today, but it should be, you know, maybe we can kind of get a consensus next week with just some, you know, some non-quorum, you know, straw polling, but let's keep moving. Is that all right with everybody?
I'm comfortable setting a straw man placeholder date in the middle of that week myself.
Okay. Do we want to just shoot for the first or second week of October in the meantime?
Yeah. We could do one week and one the next.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, because that way it doesn't hurt. Like, I know you guys all have council too. So we'll do like 1 week where one on a week that city council is meeting and one on a week that city council is meeting, just to not load any one of the bodies up with too many meetings in the week.
Okay.
Sound?
Lisa, is there anything else that you'd like to make sure that we can discuss or touch on before we continue on? Oh, sorry, Lisa, you're on mute.
I don't think there's anything else, Curtis. We can move on.
Okay. Let's thank Lisa. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. You know, Carly, thanks for the work that you're doing on this public engagement piece. I'm we'll continue to look forward to engaging with the public as we kind of fine tune our portfolio of projects. The next agenda item is item 6, which is the off Main Street parking concepts briefing, discussion, and potential action, headed up by Moab City Engineer Chuck Williams. There is a PDF that link on the agenda that's available to you. Chuck may be planning to pull that up. And then also I got one of our, oh, okay, never mind. I see Matt's in now. I just got we sent Matt an invite, wanted to make sure he could continue kind of following this. So, okay, Chuck, turn it over to you, sir.
All right, good morning. What I thought I would do is walk through the PDF with you. I won't try and take too much time, but I think it's probably worthwhile. Maybe try and answer any questions you might have or explain some of the reasoning and why we did what we did. So I'd like to share the screen with you. Did that pop up? Can you see a project overview slide?
No.
No.
No? Okay. Sorry, I'll get things open, I think. How about now? Downtown parking
Yes.
project review? Okay, great, thank you. So this is just an overview sheet that I thought was useful, and then we can get into some details I'd like to talk about. This first sheet, just to look at the project area. So I'll minimize it knowing that you can't see a lot of detail on this, but this is 100 North up here. This is Main Street, 100 West on the left, and 100 East here on the right as we're looking at the screen. You can see that we got quite a bit of median parking here, 100 North, some lesser on the east side of 100 North. Down here on Center Street, no median parking. We have parking on Curbside. Over on East Center, we were able to get a fair amount of median parking. 100 West, as we discussed before, we left alone because of the improvements and the busyness of this intersection on this side of the street. And I'll talk more about that. And then median parking over here on the east side of 100 South. And then we also put in some angled parking on 100 East. Even though it doesn't have the volume of traffic, or parking traffic, if you will, we thought we could take that opportunity that might be walkable, the one block to get down to Main Street businesses. So that's just kind of a representation of all the sheets there. I'm going to show you in detail in a moment. Okay, kind of a project overview. So this is now walking down through the street by street. On the sheet, and this is a plan over plan. And what we've got shown on here are parcel lines is the yellow. The green is existing sanitary sewer. The blue is existing water. Those are some things that at times come into consideration, both as we develop these concepts and certainly in the future if this moves forward. Those are key considerations. So again, 100 South, nothing there on. Yeah, blow it up one more. And this is Main Street and 100 South, so east side of 100 South. Currently, there's some diagonal parking out there. We would, but that needed to be removed in order to put in median parking here. So we did that. Remove the angle parking on both sides, add parallel parking on the north side, and median parking here on the middle. And you know what I'd like to do, sorry, Curtis, I'm going to move down to, with that overview, I wanted to talk about the design assumptions. That might make more sense, and then walk through them. You had not seen this before. I included it in the packet. This one up here you had seen, which was kind of a supplemental information sheet. But these were, as we went through it, and afterwards, we made sure we tried to capture. So there's no parking within 20 feet of a crosswalk. That's Utah state law. We went with a minimum travel lane width of 12 feet. I know there are places where you can go 11 feet. However, I don't think that's a safe scenario because you've got to have some space, not only for access to the adjacent parking spaces, but room for bicycles, because none of these configurations have bike lanes in them. With a minimum 12-foot lanes, we still have users out there of vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles. So making those too short is not a good plan, too narrow, in my opinion. The median parking is continuous, and therefore precludes vehicles from exiting left out from driveways. We talked that before, so it's basically right in, right out from driveways. You won't be able to make any left turns except for the one exception there is by the Moab Information Center, because it's such a large volume of traffic and the way those driveways are lined up there to allow oversized vehicles in there. We just had to leave that open. But that's a key consideration, I think, is for this. No trees or permanent landscaping are proposed for the median parking area. There's just no way I could recommend planting trees in the street because of maintenance concerns with the utilities under there, as well as pushing snow, as well as roots. Not to say there couldn't be all sorts of landscaping that wasn't permanent. You know, we've seen pictures of those before. You know, a lot of the large, I'm sure potted isn't the right word, but plants that aren't permanently planted in the street itself. But that could be changed too later. Desired median parking section is 75 feet wide. That would include 2 9-foot parallel parking lanes, 12-foot lanes, and a 33 feet median parking. But generally speaking, that doesn't fit anywhere. That was the, which we knew kind of. So there were places where we went into cutting the curb and removing trees in order to get parking spaces, and I'll show you that, not very many. But the total estimated quantity of trees we removed would be 6. So it's not like we were cutting down the forest. And I think that if indeed we chose this alternative, those 6 trees could be replaced someplace else, right, with large trees. All existing left turn through and right turn lanes from the side streets on the main street have been kept as is due to traffic volumes. And I can show you those traffic volumes. We did look at it though, because we knew there had been discussion about are they needed or are they not needed. We believe that they're needed based on traffic volume. Median parking will be delineated with stamped dyed concrete in place of existing asphalt. So remember, we've seen pictures of pavers and we've seen pictures of striped asphalt in the median parking. After researching it, the stamped dyed concrete, you can get aesthetics choices that certainly other people, not me, would make. But it would be a good sustainable surface that would last a long time, which is one of the things that we were looking for. And to be quite honest with you, if at some point in the future, the median parking way, you could still drive over the stamped concrete if we decided we needed that for travel lanes, as opposed to the pavers. Pavers are harder to maintain because, again, we have to consider snow plowing, and if they ever turn into a permanent driving surface, they wouldn't be very good for that. All parking widths are 9 feet. Buffer strips for the median parking are 2 feet wide. I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. Curbside angled parking is at 60 degrees. The steeper the more acute the angle is, the more parking spaces you can get. As we talked about, and Matt talked about before too, I mean, if you put perpendicular parking spaces in, you can get more cars per unit length than you can angled parking, but the perpendicular parking we don't think is a good idea for the traffic volumes we have. So we made the angles not 45 degree, but 60 degrees. We could pick up some spaces. Thought it was a good compromise. And the parallel parking length is between 20 and 22 feet. So that's a lot, I know, but I wanted you to know what our design assumptions were. And now I'd like to briefly go through some of those in detail sheets. So again, here, this area, this is Main Street, and this is 100 South. This is not parking, this is a buffer zone. These are the parking spaces here in the median parking. You can see that what we put in at this level was, and let me show you the detail sheet. Might be more clear. These are bollards. And actually, let me go to sheet, probably 7 to be the best one. 7. Yeah. So this is just a view of what we're talking about. So here's a median parking. This is 9 feet wide between the lines here. These are 2 parking bollards so that people know where to park. Doesn't mean that in final design, those couldn't be some other type of landscaping treatment, but these are functional for a couple of reasons. One, it allows you to delineate where cars are to park, both in vertical, if you will, and side to side. But it also prevents, remember I talked about the right in, right out. It prevents people from, if there was nobody parked there in the middle, someone coming out of a driveway and going, oh, I'm just going to cheat it and go turn left across the street. Well, that's not good if everyone's thinking that no one's turning left across that street, right? It's a safety concern to have some kind of obstruction, as well as these are the 2 foot wide buffer zones that we put in here between spaces. So there's room to open the car doors. There's room to get more you're going. There's some shelter to wait while the roadway clears before you cross the roadway to the sidewalk. So that's what I mean by bollards. I'll go back to, you can see here we have, unfortunately, sanitary sewer existing runs right underneath that line between, at the edge of the median parking and the travel lane. Culinary water is over here. Go to the next sheet. This is Center Street. This is one area where we say realign the curb and gutter. Meaning this is the existing curb out there, and we looked at this when we did our walk around. These are the areas where the trees are, very shallow roots that would need to be relocated. So we cut the curb and moved in here and got more angled parking in here. And angled parking across the street, we're able to pick up a few more spaces, but not a lot on that side, but we picked up a fair amount on this side. This also, as you can see, we have storm drain shown too. One of the things I didn't show here, but we were looking at, and I think in the future will have to be consideration, is street lighting. Some of the side streets have street lights and some of them don't. And under the median parking, you have people crossing the street mid-block, and I just think we'll have to think about that from a safety standpoint. Perhaps landscape lighting along the curb would be something to consider. This is now on to Main Street and what is it? Center Street. This is the east side of Center now. You can see we have the buffer zone here. We put these bull noses here, for lack of a better term, because we think that'll help delineate the crosswalk and keep people from drifting this way and that way. We still want to maintain the integrity of these intersection crosswalks where we have them here and over here. Then we picked up median parking through here. we lose the diagonal parking at these locations, replace it with parallel parking in an effort to pick up spots in order to get the median in here. You know, you can't do a diagonal, and the median because it's not wide enough, as we've discussed. Parallel parking here. This is the one driveway exemption that we were talking about. This is the MIC, where it can come across and go left, or you come down here and go left into there, though that's probably not the movement so much as it is out here. Now we'll move to, let's see, that's 100 East. So here's 100 South, 100 East. This is remove the existing parking and put in the new 60-degree parking. We picked up some spaces because those existing are 45-degree. You can see the difference there between that white line is what a 45-degree angle parking is, and the black line is a 60-degree. So you can see it's a little steeper, but not nearly like the 90-degree perpendicular parking would be. So this picks up some parking spaces on 100 East. Here's 100 North. This is Main Street over here on the right. Realign the curb and gutter here. Relocate that one utility pole. Go to parallel parking on this side. Maintain the parallel parking in place for the most part down here on the south side. And then this is all median parking throughout here. Maintaining the turn lanes. This is 100 North now on the east side. This is Moonflower. Nothing to do close in here. This is there's just not room for anything along in here while maintaining these turn lanes. Then begin. This is a relatively narrow street, so we went to singular median parking as opposed to the one on each side, double median parking. We're able to get parallel in here, plus we kept this as a loading zone just because of the volume of those trucks that come through there. I just think we have to do that. So that's that. Then here's a tabulation that's in your packet. And the way to read this is, so here, this is the street. There's an existing 47 parking places. If we went to just median, we'd get 57. If we went to just 60-degree, we get 63. The composite we can come up with is 57. So this is really what we recommended. And it ends up being an increase of 109 parking spaces over what's out there today. But in those drawings that I just showed you, one thing we'd have to consider, also I mentioned this last time, is we currently have construction ready plans for 100 South, our green infrastructure project. And if we did not do a redesign on that, we would only have 100 parking spaces. But if we go to the 109, we will need to do a redesign at least partially on that 100 South project, which we're just waiting for funding on. And the other thing I would like to share with you quickly, if I may, Curtis, is, I think the best way to do it. Do you see that now, that the screen turning movement count, did that come up?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is and I'm happy to share this with you. This is just kind of hot off the press, but we had it in this exhibit format. What we took were turning movement counts on April 19th of 2019, which is near one of the Easter holidays. And we took these based on the cameras that UDOT has. They create a lot of data. And so you have a total volume in a day, and then you have a peak hour volume in traffic engineering. So as an example right here, from 100 North, turning left onto Main Street on April 19th, 2019, there were a total of 433 cars during that 24-hour period. And during the peak hour, there were 54 turning. So, you know, call it 1 a minute. Then here's the through volumes and the right turn volumes. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out on this exhibit is traffic volume. So these are from our city-owned traffic counters, where we count streets throughout the, you know, with the tube system. On May 31st to June 5th, we do a 7-day count, then we normalize it. The average daily traffic volume was 2,327 cars per day, and the peak hour then was 238. So these numbers don't add up to these numbers. I don't want to confuse you on that, because this was April 19th of 2019, and this was May of 2018. But it gives you an idea of turning movement counts. Over here on the east side, now I won't belabor all of these, but I know we talked about whether or not this was needed on this side, but here there was 109 during the peak hour and 71 and 68. And those are certainly sufficient volumes to justify turning movements and then turning lanes. And then here's the volumes, traffic volumes in July of 2018, 3,000. And the reason I think we just got to consider that in all of this is it's the schizophrenia of Moab, right? I mean, January, call it December, January, February, it's pretty much us locals and then the through freight traffic, right? That comes down Main Street. We don't get a lot of traveler, tourist activity, generally speaking, right? I mean, but come March through May in a normal non-COVID year, we get these bumps where we go from, you know, 10,000 locals who might be using, you know, 5,000 from the city, 5,000 from surrounding Grand County coming into town for whatever reason. So we have 30 to 40,000 people coming through town during those peak months. So that's why we keep looking at these volumes and thinking we just have to make sure that we're thinking, if my recommendation, of our peaks as well as the lows. I mean, and it's kind of schizophrenic because there's two different volumes are appreciable. We also have some of the street lights that we have on our GIS located here on this map. At the intersections are well lit. And then the last thing is, so this is 6 sheets, and again, I'll be happy to share this exhibit. We did May 25th of 2019 versus for the next 3 sheets, and I won't go through those right now. I don't think we need to, versus the April 19th. So we have 2 turning movement count days on there, as well as the traffic volumes. So with all of that, that's what I wanted to share with you. I explained that. I'd be happy, Curtis, if anyone has questions, or happy to try and answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump into some Q&A. Appreciate that presentation, Chuck. Mike, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, well, Chuck, thank you so much. That's great. It gets more detail all the time. I appreciate that. There were a lot of comments about pedestrian safety, all right, from median parking in the center. And there's no question people would have to cross, 12-foot lanes a lot. And then you brought up the idea of trying to do this at night, more street lighting. This runs directly counter, of course, to what the Dark Skies Initiative is trying to accomplish. We'd like to keep the town dark if we can, and this is headed the other way. So what's your professional opinion then on to what extent pedestrians, they come in and they park in the center of the median and then they want to walk to the curbs on the other side? I mean, I would like to think that with enough education and signage and people getting used to things that I know when I'm trying to cross a busy street, oftentimes I really look forward to having a blocked median, as you will, because I know I'm safe there and I've only got a few steps to go, so to speak, to get across the traffic lane. But other people may see it completely differently. What do you think?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. And I've struggled with this over the course of this exercise we've all been going through. If it was just us locals, I think we could make an education campaign that says, look, this is the way things are happening now. We put in these median parking, and there is, guess what? You're allowed to, what in other states is called jaywalking, but in Utah, it's not called jaywalking. It's called crossing the street where you want to, but you have to give the vehicles the right of way. That's Utah state law, right? That we've discovered during this process. What concerns me is the other users. And in traffic engineering, you know, that's what we got to look at as our users, and same way traffic control devices and street signs, we have to try and make sure we're communicating our message correctly. And what I've struggled with, Mike, is when people come here during those non-winter months, if you will, from other places that are where jaywalking is illegal, I don't know how we communicate to them that, okay, you park in the median, and when you walk across that 12-foot lane, you're not doing anything illegal. However, you have to give the right of way to the vehicle. And so I've struggled with it. I mean, a big part of me says that I don't like the median parking simply because I'm worried about pedestrian safety. Because we can't do what we have in front of City Hall, as we discussed. If we could put those sidewalks along the median parking and have a mid-block crosswalk, I wouldn't have any concerns about it, honestly with you, because I think we provide a mechanism for people to get out of their cars, walk safely to a marked crosswalk, and then cross. That takes care of the concerns I would have for pedestrian safety. So, if I answered your question.
Thank you. Anybody else's opinion on the matter?
I'd just like to, on the lighting issue, the intention of the dark skies is not that there's not any more lighting. It's just that we do it better and we light appropriately at levels, locations, directionally, to meet the needs. And if there's more pedestrian activity and safety dictates that there's more lighting, then just that we do it well, and that collectively the trajectory is towards preserving the night sky. But it was never, I don't believe, that we wouldn't necessarily add lighting where appropriate to support downtown activity. And I think it's important that we do it well, that's a critical component of that. But I just don't want the code or the movement to be, we don't want to box ourselves in that it's like all about darkness everywhere, because it's not, because safety is a critical component, and good lighting and even more lighting done well contributes to that.
Well, my question for you, Caitlin, I guess is, what's the philosophy here? In other words, we have these long strips, which for the most part don't have sidewalks in the median, as Chuck would like to have. And if we don't try to restrict people to crossing at specific points, it seems like, in theory, you'd have to light the entire length of the median. I mean, if you say, well, we need to eliminate one spot because people are going to cross here. Well, if they can cross anywhere, wouldn't you have to eliminate the entire median if for the same safety criteria?
You may, but we can discuss, they can be well shielded both from the sky and with a little bit more attention from neighboring properties. We can look at what illumination level is actually necessary. I, with Chuck, had if you remember, the lighting engineers who came and presented on the analysis they had done for the North 191 planning, some of the research they've done is that you can actually illuminate at a much lower level than is commonly accepted and achieve the same functional safety goals. So we could potentially take the light that is currently being shown on the intersections in this corridor and redistribute it, or maybe a little bit more, but with better shielding, and actually come out ahead, but improve the safety. Because perhaps a little bit in counter to what Chuck is describing in front of City Hall, people don't always, I don't walk to those crosswalks. I think the reality is that the median and the travel lane width creates a lot of traffic calming in conjunction with lower speed limit. And that's going to change the dynamic on all these streets. And it's going to be a lot easier for people to cross and to cross safely. And perhaps even more so than the current situation where you have like 70+ feet of asphalt to get across and no visual cues to motorists that they need to slow down or that the pedestrians have the right of way. Because I mean, currently we have a situation where people aren't necessarily stopping consistently for pedestrians. So I think there's a lot of benefits to the median parking, and if we look at it clearly.
Karen, I think Karen's got a comment, and then Matt.
You're muted, Karen.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you for commenting on the lighting, Kaylin, because I think I've been to quite a few communities that have dark sky ordinances, like especially in Kona, Hawaii, and they have done a fabulous job of actually just lighting what needs to be lighted and people feeling safe. Chuck, thank you for getting this draft information. The one thing that I feel like we have a real disconnect with, I mean, this is the engineering side, and there's zero design qualities to this. And that is counter to like the responses that we had from the community. And I think it's also counter to what our desire was as a committee to looking at, you know, redesigning the downtown. And this just feels, you know, like if we went strictly with just doing stamped concrete, that would be a concern for me. So I don't know I'm not expecting you to have the, you know, the design aspects, but is like Curtis, I guess this is that question again, like, how do we, because it feels like staff doesn't have the time to be able to do it, or I mean, is there funds to actually, you know, go through a design process? I mean, because Matt gave us some super fabulous examples, and this is just almost just a step above painting the streets. So I'm just curious where we're at with this.
So I can answer that question. I know this process is confusing, but I appreciate these questions. What we need to do first is establish a concept to determine if it's even feasible. If UDOT ultimately selects this project, we would hire a design team to design. So all of that work has yet to be done. It's not that it's not going to be done. It's just we need to know if this is even feasible and how many like parking spots we could get to meet UDOT's needs. So there would be public engagement on the other side of project selection. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then
design work.
So, and then a second, the comment that I would say is that, I mean, we talked about it briefly, but like extending these ideas, you know, a block up on like in front of the mark, and then also taking it to 200 West is also same time, because that's also a downtown area where there's commerce and it's, you know, closer to Swanee Park, and, you know, allowing for, you know, this to continue a little further north is seems like something that I don't know if we need to address now or if this at a later date, or if anybody else is interested in pushing this a little further.
So originally the scope of this was set, I don't know if it was by that subcommittee that was meeting or this, I don't remember, but this was for the radius set at that point. If we would like to take it up some blocks, we can, but that will take time. It'll take months to do for a concept level. And then obviously design, it would take more time on design too. But I don't know if we can get that by November 1st. And certainly we can.
I think the key, if I may, the key questions that I have right now, I think that the dialogue about like when the aesthetics comes into play is really good. But I think our key questions, and we don't have Monty, but we have Robert and Jeff in the call, is like how many, and that you may have mentioned this, Chuck, so excuse me if this is redundant, but how many parking spaces with our concept design we stand to net with what was just presented, and what's an approximate cost? Do we have that information? Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, so the net increase, if we don't do the 100 projects, was 109 spaces under this concept. And I had a discussion with Monty. I'm working on a cost estimate, and I promised I'd have it to you next week, and I will. I've got a draft right now, but I talked to Monty about it, what to include for aesthetics, and he basically agreed. And I don't know if he's had a chance to tell you this, Jeff, or not, but when we had the parking structure, we had 6% of the total funds available for what we called were structural aesthetics. Those were the aesthetics things that the architects were working on. And Monty says that he thinks that that's the same number that we should use for this. So in my cost estimate that I'll have for you, I'm going to tally up everything that's structural and then add 6% in for aesthetics. So when you see that cost estimate next week, that'll be the number that preliminarily, at least in conversations with Monty, he said that UDOT could support. Now, whether or not you can better that is up to y'all, but it's what he told me that for purposes of developing this cost estimate, that he could support that.
Okay. Hey, thank you for that, Chuck. Another quick question. So with the 109 spaces that we would be netting with this off Main Street parking concept, that's to be compared to the 180, if I'm not mistaken, parking spaces that we were going to net with the parking structure. And your discussions with Monty, has that come across as an acceptable number? Maybe that's a question for you or Carly. I haven't asked him that question because that's been a moving target, and it seems like that number is moving less and less, and we're getting more firm on what that number is. Do we have any indication on the level of satisfaction with that number from UDOT? Or
No, Monty had been gone on vacation, and we had a really quick phone call. He returned my phone call, and I was focused on the aesthetics number because I knew that was important, which answers part of the question Karen had there, which is we'll include it in the cost, but the design would come out later by a designer. It wouldn't be, I think I've been upfront with you from day one that we're not landscape architects and we're not downtown.
Right.
yeah,
We can help maximize this stuff in the public. My focus is safety as well as protecting our infrastructure, but there's certainly other things that can be done beyond engineering level drawings. But I did want to get the number from
Sure.
Monty with support. So, but I did not have these graphics. I think I did send him these though a couple of days ago. I think when I gave them to Carly to submit to the committee, he could have this.
So without having an idea of cost, so I guess just to give you an idea of my mindset is if it's determined that 109 spaces isn't sufficient and the cost, the budget that associates this concept is, 7 million, 8 million ish, 6 million, 5 million, I don't have any idea. But to Karen's point, it seems like a way to alleviate that potentially would be to kind of expand the scope of work to incorporate, another block or two to get to that number. That's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't know how you all feel about that, but I say that not having any, frankly, idea of what our ballpark cost is. And I don't know if you feel comfortable just sharing something that we wouldn't hold you to, of course, Chuck, just to give us a ballpark idea.
I kind of knew we were going to go there.
Yeah, me too.
It's on the, and don't hold me to this, please.
Yeah.
Because I really do need to I use are reasonable, and I certainly want that to be that way. And at this level of design, but I'm going to say it's on the order of 3.5 million to 4 million right now.
Okay.
Yeah, well, Chuck, you've got 4 heavy-duty blocks, so to speak, in particular the one on First North west side where you're going to pull the curb. But so $4 million for 4 blocks comes out $1 million per block. Does that sound ballpark?
And it could be less. My instincts are it's not more. And just for clarity, what Keelan and Karen said was right on the lighting. What my point was, we'd have to address it. So, and you know what we did on Aggie Boulevard, that's all dark sky compliant lights. I know we wouldn't have as tall street lights in downtown. So we have those lights. That might be something to consider. Shorter. So that's all doable, but that's just a project cost, I think, that we'd have to consider. So that'll be in that cost estimate as well. The reason I brought that up. But yeah, Mike, that's about 4 million, 3.5 to 4 million right now as a draft.
Thank you.
So are there, go ahead, Karen.
I'm sorry, Curtis, but I just, one of the other meetings, and obviously you guys know that I'm very well aware of like the Emma Boulevard, but that was part of a discussion too. Like, is that, there was, when we asked Monty if, you know, that parking behind there would be included in our number, and that, I mean, is that still a discussion like that would be part of, you know, I forgot what, I don't even remember what the number was, 30 or 40 spaces. Is that on top of the 109?
Is part of the challenge that the ball's a little bit in our court, and I mean, we would like specifics from UDOT, but they're also waiting for us to make a proposal that they respond to. Carly or Chuck or UDOT, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Like, for example, one of the things I was hoping to give UDOT today is whether we want them to proceed with their analysis of downtown improvements. If you recall, they were waiting for us to complete this sort of concept so they could plug, I guess, this into their model that they would need to run. And that takes time. I think the number is about 6 weeks, which is where they would need to be for a November 1st decision. But if you're not interested in downtown improvements, and you want to go all in on off-Main Street parking, and you know, maybe trying to do it, expand the radius of the off-Main Street parking improvements, then I would say UDOT shouldn't bother with that model. We can just work to try to develop whatever more information that they would need to feel comfortable with that concept, with expanding that. So I think it is up to us to start saying what you're interested in pursuing, back and forth between UDOT about how they feel about that.
And are downtown improvements, specifically 191 Main Street improvements, as we sort of, maybe as they were articulated by the downtown plan drawings, or is this something else?
I think it's the improvements we spoke about at the very beginning of this new process.
Right, so some bulb outs and
yeah, the turning, and I think we also spoke about the median kind of question. But you know, if you want to pursue that, we need to give them some lead time to make that happen.
Do you have a date? I feel like I like to give them that feedback, but I didn't come to this meeting prepared for that particular decision. So I'm wondering if there's a deadline.
Let's talk to Jeff and Robert about how much time we need for a model.
I missed that. Carly, go ahead.
Sorry about that. So regarding, you know, the beginning of this process, it seemed that UDOT would want to do a model before, or to evaluate the feasibility and wisdom of some improvements along Main Street, like bulb outs and limiting turning at certain intersections, and as well as a center median. And I think there was talk of a model being employed to do that analysis. What kind of time frame do you need for that?
So we've been running a model, and we've had a couple of meetings internally to discuss various options, kind of looking at the elimination of left turns with those exception locations, bulb outs at the intersections, nothing in the mid block, but bulb outs at the intersections. We also modeled it with and without parking on Main Street just to see kind of how that was happening. We just received back kind of a second round analysis that we haven't really had a chance to really talk through ourselves. Looking at 2030 numbers, versus 2019 Memorial Day was what we were really trying to analyze, kind of a worst case scenario. But we do have that. So it would not take long. I mean, I would say less than 2 weeks for us to analyze specific scenarios that the city's interested in or be able to. We may already have those analyzed and just be able to talk to that. One other comment that I wanted to make on the parking, Monty's kind of he's the lead man, obviously, on the criteria and how UDOT's going to, I guess, review. But I think, I mean, total number of parking stalls was a factor, but I think also cost per stall is a key element relative to that. So, whether it's 109 or 150, one of the key elements is going to be, cost per stall to actually create that. And that's going to be a factor that will need to be, in the works at some point in time, estimated or not.
Yeah, and it seems like, without not holding Chuck to that number, but it seems like if we're at, somewhere between 65 to 75% of the 60 to 75% of the parking stalls with the current concept design, at a cost of, 3.5 to 4.5. I mean, just back of the napkin, it seems like, and that with that ratio, we're doing okay. Question that I have is, this is probably for Chuck. I got to put you on the spot just a little bit, but just to rewind kind of back to that discussion, and Carly noted, we did have an initial scope of work that we agreed to, and I definitely recall that. Chuck, what remaining streets outside of that scope have you identified, any of those that if we expanded the scope to encompass those, that would be amenable to what we're trying to accomplish there with additional parking? Any blocks come to mind that were kind of clipped out of the scope that if the committee wanted to expand the scope of work, where would that go? I don't know if you can provide a response to that off the top of your head, but.
Well, the question is, how far will people park to get downtown? And then, of course, then the question is, how big is downtown? It's not one spot, it's not one street, it's streets. But I think Karen's right. It could go up, and I think Evan had mentioned 100 North perhaps could go up another block because there's enough activity there, both from a traffic standpoint, and we've got the food co-op and the post office down there that I think require a lot of action. So I think that would be one location to consider. Center Street would be out both to the west and to the east because we already have it treated essentially, and it doesn't go to the west. And then 100 South, it takes that bend. There's no way to go to the west there. Extending it up 100 South to the east, I don't know because we get close. I just don't know about that one. But 100 North, I think, would be a likely place to go a block further. and it could probably pick up some spaces there, and it might be beneficial.
Sorry, Chuck, what do we think for additional spaces? Again, I won't hold you to it, 10 spaces, 15 spaces, what's a,
Like going up on 100 North, another block?
yeah, just a estimate net.
Let me quickly look at my tabulation numbers for what we were picking up. You know, we picked up between 10 and 28, depending on the streets. So let's just say, without, you know, taking half of that, say 15. That's without, you know, looking at anything, without looking at design, just
Yeah,
kind of averaging out what we were able to pick up on those other streets. On all streets, we picked up at least 10 and up to 28. So call it 15 is for a back of the napkin conversation.
yeah. So with that being said, like, I definitely think, given, you know, the overarching goal of increasing parking with this concept, and the factor that we're at anywhere from, like, you know, 35 to just under 50% of a budget that I know we're not supposed to be basing things off of, but it is real and it is there. It seems like if we could, you know, I would like to see the committee, you know, choose to pursue adding that 100 North. And if there are any other blocks that we think, you know, makes sense to be included, you know, I think that would make sense. And I don't know, as far as like with the time constraints, I don't know if that, you know, if that's, you know, Chuck, if there's hesitations there or what thoughts you have on that, but to me, that's a no-brainer. I don't know how you all feel. And I know, Matt, you've been raising your hand, so want to get your comments when you get a second.
I mean, yeah, I was going to comment on the safety related aspects of crossing the street, and also the issue of the number of turning lanes that would be required. Chuck, going back to your slides, I was really encouraged to see the data that you had there on traffic movements and peak traffic movements from UDOT cameras. Are we able to drill down still further and see how often those intersections clear, how often they don't clear, and then the distribution of that traffic over time, both temporal via the day and by month, to get a more detailed appreciation of when those intersections won't clear and how many lanes we need? I'd like to see, or I'd like to hope that we could reduce the number of turning lanes, for example. And if we've got the amount of traffic on a street, we're also able to quantify the probability of a conflict, for example, what spacing there is between a pedestrian wanting to cross the street and a traffic movement. So that helps us quantify risk when it comes to a risk assessment point of view. I was just wanting to know, I know it's labor intensive, but if the data is there from UDOT, I'd like to see if we couldn't drill down further when it comes to the design piece, so we can more definitively answer some of those questions.
I don't think that data is available. It's numeric, but perhaps it is. But turning lanes are generally based upon peak hours, movements in the peak hour, and that's what I showed on that graphic, was peak hour movement.
But as part of that, we've got the peak hour movements. The question would be, how often doesn't that intersection clear based on those peak movements? Now, the numbers I saw were something like 60 movements per hour. That's 1 per minute. Now, I know the section time for some of those turns is about 1.5 minutes, and some of them are about half a minute. So we should be able to get a more detailed understanding of how many turning lanes we need, what the delay will be, how often that intersection won't clear, and therefore what's the optimum level of turning lanes. Additionally, for people crossing the street, we have an understanding of how many car spaces there will be. We have an understanding of what the current traffic movement is. So we'll get an understanding of, well, what is the gap between traffic? What is the likelihood that a pedestrian will cross that street? So we are able to start quantifying some of these aspects that at the moment, it's not just putting a finger up in the air and saying, oh, well, I think it will be a problem. We'll be able to using this data, we should be able to drill down and say, well, you know, it might be an issue this much of the time.
Well, and you may have that opinion, Matt, but I'm here to tell you that it wasn't a finger on the whiteboard. Those are the methods that you use as vehicles per hour. And in my professional opinion, we need those turning lanes. So you can have a different opinion, and that's fine. And you can have access to the data through UDOT, do that. But I've looked at it, and I have a professional opinion about it in those turning lanes. And I don't know that that gains you more parking spaces anyway, very much. So, but the data is there, that data, you can certainly have access to it as public information.
Hey, I just wanted to like circle back to the timing question to make sure we kind of get an idea. Chuck, if we were to have those additional like expanded some concept level work, how much would you need for those additional blocks?
Are we talking about one block up 100 North?
I think we had two in mind, 2 blocks, right? Was it Center and 100 North?
No, I thought it was just 100 North, but maybe Curtis could clarify that.
Well, I kind of left that as an open-ended question to the group. So I would like to have at least 2 more blocks, but if it doesn't make sense, you know, for certain reasons, then it doesn't make sense. But I wouldn't mind having a little discussion there.
Yeah.
But to answer Carly's question, which is also a question that I have, is let's just say theoretically we added, 2 more blocks. What
would it look like in terms of time?
Yeah.
2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Yeah, we learned a lot. We could get it done more quickly than it took us to get this, but 2 weeks or less.
Then that would mean, if we would want to do that, I would want it definitely to be part of the engagement, whatever it is that we do, at the beginning of October, because I suspect those blocks, because we're getting more into a residential zone, will be ones where we get a lot of comment, because it's kind of getting away from the commercial zones. And I would definitely want to capture the neighborhood, make sure we engage those residents, especially.
And so to be clear, Chuck, the additional block, or at least the one additional block that you identified that's 100 North between, is that between 100 and 200 East? Is that correct?
That's correct. And that's kind of a mixed use block, I think, to Carly's point. There's some residential and some commercial or office stuff. So I think that's the one block, and I'm looking at Google Earth now, and the other one I think somebody threw out there was 200 North. That means,
the west side of, like closer to Swanee Park, because that's all commercial down there. That's where things can like grow and build. I mean, we're limited in our commercial space. And so, yeah, I think that area makes a bunch of sense, especially, non-COVID years. Swanee gets a lot of use, and you have the what's the Thai restaurant right there on the corner, and I mean, like that block going up to River Canyon Lodge, or I believe that's what it is.
So that's 200 North between Main and 100 West.
Yeah.
What else do we have on that? Let's try to get through this, guys, before we start swerving around some more. Let's get through this exercise.
So Curtis, let me throw out one more option. It's an old one. You may remember Emma Boulevard, very far north end, not too far away from the Hawk Light across 191 and so forth. UDOT had talked about funding it under certain circumstances. It was I want to say maybe 20 spaces. It might be relatively cheap to build that. I don't know if you want to, if the rest of you guys are inclined to throw that into the mix or not.
And would you rephrase that just again real quick, Mike? What the location was?
Yeah, Emma Boulevard. That's the street that begins at the south end at 4th North, and the idea was it connects with the multi-use path there that heads south. And Emma Boulevard and that whole stretch has been a subject of long contention. But my understanding was that UDOT had offered, under certain circumstances, to pave, provide a parking lot at the far north end of it just before it does a little dog leg back to the right to get back to the highway. So I don't know that was what we used to call form of dispersed parking. So we might consider that parking lot under this umbrella.
Okay.
So starting
Are
with,
there any other blocks? So we've got 100 north between 100 east and 200 east, 200 north between Main and 100 west. Mike just added the kind of Emma Boulevard 400 north parking lot that was in the dispersed parking discussion. Are there any more blocks that we want to have under consideration that make sense?
I'd like to voice maybe a different opinion, and that is that I would like money in the pot for the Main Street improvements, if at all possible, and at least part of the Spanish Valley bike path. And I'm not sure how what those totals will be, but I would prioritize those over expanding the scope of the parking area. And if cost per stall is a major criteria, then I'm guessing that we don't need to hit a higher stall count to get there.
Okay, perhaps at this point, we should straw poll and see of the committee members. Caitlin brings up a good point. You know, I was thinking we could just kind of at least get those options as additional blocks flushed out. But if the committee, you know, if it makes sense for the committee to kind of arrive at a decision point and see if we want to just accept the scope of work for what it is in terms of the, you know, the number of streets and blocks to add parking, you know, just pivot and start to kind of flush out more projects with what financial bandwidth we have left, then so be it. But we should probably kind of go, I would like to go through and kind of poll everyone and see what they want to do, just so we're not, you know, not heading off in a direction without you all on a walk. So here's what I would propose to you is do you want to task Chuck with assessing those at least 2 additional blocks, 100 north and 200 north, to add to the concept? Or do you want to turn now and focus on other projects to package in with this project and the current scope of work? Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm gonna roll call real quick.
Curtis, can I make a comment first?
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm not opposed to throwing those last 2 blocks in, or even Emma Boulevard, but I would like to, of course, see a cost breakdown of what it costs to add each one of those on, so that at the end of the day, we have an option and a way to say, well, it makes more sense to pursue these other projects rather than this. So if we're voting with that caveat, I think we probably ought to throw Emma Boulevard in there too.
Yeah, I was hoping that we could head off in that direction, you know, in the name of having options, because I'm telling you, I still don't like how lean we are on parking spaces. It makes me uncomfortable. And if we have the opportunity, you know, to add another, you know, 20% on what we have now, give or take, in parking spaces, while we're already, you know, going in and doing that project, to me, that's a no-brainer. To maximize the park downtown was kind of one of those primary goals. So we can always circle back, you know, at the next meeting when Chuck has identified the true net, you know, parking spaces to be added if we incorporate those blocks into the scope of work, and decide if we want to do that right now. We don't want to waste his time, though. I mean, I think we should have enough. We should be able to reach consensus right now to decide if we intend to add those blocks to the scope of work, assuming that they pencil out. Surely we know enough now. And even with the addition of those blocks, I don't think that's going to clip another project. I mean, there's still plenty of room there. So I would like to go ahead with the straw poll if you all are okay with it. Okay, so I'll start with Mr. Jones because he's in the top square of my screen. Caitlin, do you want to vote yay for adding those 2 blocks at this point, or vote nay and move on to discussing other projects?
My understanding of the agenda is that we're going to move on to discussing those other projects anyway. I would like to see them analyzed.
We are going to discuss the other projects, but we do need to, because we don't have much time left, we do need to kind of put the finishing touches on this downtown parking.
Yes,
project.
I'd like to see them analyzed.
Okay. Mr. Duncan? Is that a?
Yeah, no, it's a qualified yes in the sense that from UDOT and this program's point of view, it makes perfect sense. Those 2 blocks that Karen mentioned were originally on my hit list as well. I'm afraid though that they're going to run into more pushback from residents. The farther away you get from Main Street and the deeper you get into residential neighborhoods, the more we're going to hear about it. That's my fear, but it's something we can certainly consider.
Okay. Wes?
Yeah, I would say, expand the scope a little bit. Those other consideration.
Okay. Karen?
Yes.
Jaylyn? Thumbs up. Evan?
I would say yes as well. I also apologize that I lost track of what happened with the dispersed parking ideas about utilizing some of the privately owned lots downtown. I know that there were some like timeline constraints around that before, but I didn't know if that was something that was still on the table. And if it is, I would like to see, UDOT had called out the possibility of adding 180 stalls right there. And I know not all those lots are on the table, but I would like to, if that still is some option, I don't want to forget about it.
Okay. So I'm not just skipping over your question there, Evan, but I want to just so that's a yes to include those 2 blocks, yes. 100 north between 100 east and 200 east, 200 north between Main and 100 west. So we would like to have those analyzed in the next 2 weeks and included in the scope of work, Mr. Williams. Emma Boulevard, question for staff. What discussion do we need to have there, if any, to include that in the concept? Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, Emma Boulevard, we spent a lot of time at the city on that, and we council held a public meeting, or excuse me, it wasn't a public meeting, it was a workshop, I think, Mike or Karen can correct me on that. But I think that we achieved consensus with the neighbors on what they were willing, what they would find acceptable. And we actually did a concept design and a concept cost estimate. So I believe that what we could do is give you the committee that also, and then get then you can make a decision if you want to move that forward. Part of the issue there was, the question was whether or not we need to bring a paved road from 191 to the parking lot. The question was whether or not UDOT would pay for that. And I don't think we ever finalized that discussion, but we can bring that up again. So my comment to you, Curtis, is I can give you what I believe was acceptable to council. Never voted on it, but we reached agreement at this large meeting with the public, neighbors and that, on what was acceptable to them at that time, which was probably about 1.5 years ago. And we have a cost estimate, and I can bring that back to the committee when I give you those other 2 blocks, and you can decide if you want to include that or not.
Okay, that sounds good. Let's all remember, our recommendations are to be approved by both councils, kind of ratified by them also. So is it a thumbs up from the committee to incorporate Emma Boulevard, 400 North dispersed parking project in this scope of work? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up, Karen, Jalen. Okay, so Emma Boulevard will be included in those additions to the scope of work. Thank you all very much for your patience as we work through this. Chuck, thank you for your work on this, and Matt, your contributions. And let's try to, we're getting close, kind of get that concept design and budget wrapped up. Are there any other comments or questions on this agenda item before we move on into our discussion of other projects?
Curtis, I wanted to make a comment. This is Robert.
Please do.
I just want to, I think it's appropriate for you folks to ask the question to UDOT, and Monty's probably the one that needs to answer this, but that is, as I heard the discussion that Kaylin brought up, I'm wondering if items are mutually exclusive, or if the, like, for example, the Spanish Valley bike path, if that's something that can go in addition, and the Main Street improvements, if those are, if those costs have to be lumped into the dispersed parking costs to come up with that average per stall, or if that's something separate. I think that's the question that you guys, we need to have answered as we move forward. Are those mutually exclusive, or are they combined? Are we just looking at parking costs? And I think that will help you folks make that decision a little bit better as to what we include, knowing that, you originally had an amount of dollars that was appropriated to the project, but that money now has to be rejustified, based on certain criteria.
Yeah. Well, the only two true parking projects that we have on our plate right now are the off Main Street parking project, and now potentially the Emma Boulevard dispersed parking. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. The Main Street improvements, the multi-use pathway, the southern recreational trailer parking, which we can touch on, really just hasn't gotten off the launch pad. And then there's been discussion of some kind of transit. So really the only two true parking projects that we have is the off Main Street parking that Chuck's, staff's been working on, and this dispersed parking, lot at Emma Boulevard. And so I guess we would just, if I'm understanding your comments correctly, we would need to understand if the cost of the Emma Boulevard project is going to be factored into, lumped into the, that ratio of the parking spaces that we create with the off Main Street parking. And I don't know.
I don't think they are. But I can't speak for Monty specifically. He's had discussions with, with Carlos and Jason and Terry up north relative to, how this project is going to be reviewed and approved. And so he has that, but I do know that congestion relief, the criteria that was set up for the appropriation of these funds, dispersed parking or parking was just one factor. And I just want to make sure everybody's focused on that we're not, Kaylin's comment was, are we going to, preclude ourselves, at least my interpretation of that, and it may be incorrect, but we're going to preclude yourselves from doing Main Street improvements or the bike path by pursuing additional parking, and that I think you deserve a little bit more explanation from a UDOT perspective on how that's going to impact or not the funding.
Yeah, I completely agree. We one of the challenges that we've had, just so it's clear and that is we've had this number, which was basically the monies that was assigned to the parking structure, and the total monies we were awarded through the Hotspot process. And I mean, that budget is ingrained in our heads, but we've also been told to not budget this go around and just put the projects together. And so I think, you know, with Kaylin's concerns, you know, my thought is rounding out the scope of work more, making it more inclusive to create more parking isn't, in my opinion, shouldn't hurt the ability for other projects to get funded.
I agree.
So,
Okay.
any other comments, questions?
I would just,
No, my only concern was about the allocation of a limited pool of money. And I think whatever clarity UDOT can offer in terms of how scoring will proceed. I mean, we had the framework that we did on the first round, and then we feel like we've been operating a little bit in the dark. So that would be great to have whatever information you're willing to offer on that.
Okay.
I would also,
Go ahead, Evan.
not to like just keep throwing more shotgun blasts in there. I definitely would echo what Kaylin was saying about having that. But I kind of had a little recollection of the downtown improvements or Main Street improvements being coupled with downtown. And I felt like we were kind of getting some pressure from UDOT of, you know, reducing that friction on Main Street. And we were like, you know, as we've seen from the survey results, trying to prioritize the pedestrian and bicycle experience down there. And I thought we were kind of working at some of this parking stuff as a bit of a trade of like, hey, we'll give up a little on Main Street if we can, you know, replace that with more parking to improve this pedestrian experience. And so I would like to kind of keep that. I don't know if we don't have Main Street changes that we're bringing to the table, how it will be received from UDOT. I think that was kind of something that they were looking for, and but maybe that's evolved since I kind of got that tit for tat feeling.
Well, we still, no, you're right, Evan, absolutely. And we still have the outline question of, you know, when we finish the off Main Street concept, or at what point before we finish it, we're getting close now, how much time is it going to take UDOT to do their modeling to kind of propose some Main Street improvement options? That's still a loose end, you know, that's out there. You know, that I don't think is completely clear. I know we've discussed it a little bit today.
And I think it's important for us to be involved in that design concept because we don't want it to just be like a pipeline highway right down there. You know, I think that there was some, you know, there needs to be some discussion around what's acceptable to us and them and really, you know, work as partners on that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Karen?
I was just gonna say the same thing. I thought that the off-street parking and Main Street improvements were tied in together as priorities from this at the very beginning, but that was just, but yeah, that was it.
Hey, Wes?
Yeah, I'll just remind everybody about that. So, you know, Monty's thing with the Main Street improvements, any Main Street improvements was going to cause friction. And he said that in the meeting. And so that's where all that went. And I think that's where we took our focus. It's like, okay, well, we're going to focus on off Main Street parking.
Yeah.
And kind of set ourselves up. So yeah, I think we kind of threw that out the window. The Main Street improvements was thrown out the window because it was going to cause friction with anything that we did on Main Street. So just to remind everybody how that went down.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we need to, you know, huddle back up at our next meeting, you know, call another meeting 2 weeks from now, whatever, and like really drill down on that when Monty's here, or, you know, assuming Robert and Jeff don't want to comment on that or aren't prepared to comment on that issue today, we can do that, because Evan is got really good points, but Wes is he's being factual. Reciting kind of where we end up on that is we had this list of options of Main Street improvements on paper, and we went through that in an exercise, and essentially said there's really nothing here you can do that helps congestion. Direction from the committee, there were committee members that were kind of pursuing ideas that in turn weren't going to alleviate congestion. It was just frankly an attempt to make Main Street more pedestrian friendly and slow things down, which in UDOT's terms equaled congestion. And so we kind of just ended at a standoff there and moved on to problems that we can solve. And so it's up to you all how you want to work through that. If you want to have a discussion with that in the next meeting to kind of drill back into that. I do know that we needed to get our off Main Street concept put together before they could run their modeling, and so we need to go over that too. Carly, I don't know if you have thoughts or.
Yeah, I think what we would need in order to do some effective engagement, and to, whatever the open house and that's going to happen at the beginning of October, we need a list of projects, whichever ones you want vetted. It can be all of them, but I think we need to start drilling down on what you want feedback on, and we need those concepts too. So if it's downtown, the Main Street improvements, we'll need that information from UDOT. If it's the shared use path, we're going to need to get that information from the county. So I think it's probably my recommendation would be have a meeting next week, so we have time to prepare those materials, and then shoot for the beginning of October. But yeah, that I think we're kind of at that kind of decision point where it's the final group that you want to start evaluating for engagement.
Okay. Caitlin, go ahead.
Well, it sounds like UDOT has done modeling of, and so that could inform our discussion. I mean, rather than just considering like Main Street improvements equals friction, end of story. I mean, maybe now we can look at how that, what the net effects are and whether they'd consider it and what we think the benefits are. So if there's more data, I think we should circle back and incorporate that, but not just repeat the previous conversation.
Yeah.
And
Let's do that.
Next meeting, maybe, right?
Yeah, let's do that.
So Curtis, let me just comment and maybe offer a suggestion. If we could schedule another meeting in a couple of weeks, I think your expectation could be that UDOT would present the results of the modeling that we've done thus far and identify congestion or no congestion. It is kind of interesting, some of the information we've seen, and I think you guys need to be brought up to speed. So that's not an unreasonable expectation. Hopefully Monty will agree with me. I think he's prepared to, that we're prepared to have that discussion with the city. Jeff and I weren't a half hour to go through that modeling results. We would be happy to do that.
Let's plan to do that. And we are already 2 hours into this, and we still have a whole nother item to get into for new projects. So if we don't have any other additional questions, comments on the off Main Street parking, let's move on.
Yeah, I'll schedule a meeting for like 2 weeks out, just so you guys can know that's coming.
Okay, sounds good. So we're going to move on to item number 7, which is a review of basically our other projects. Up first for the shared use path, I want to turn that over to council members Hawks, Clapper, and potentially Jones as our kind of co-sponsors of that project at this point. And, just for context, really, we've needed to focus on our entree of what our package is going to be that we present to UDOT, which has been our parking project downtown. So we're kind of starting to expand the conversation and look at other projects that we may want to propose to UDOT. And we'll start with the shared use path.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Wells. I spent some time this morning going over this project. It's been in the back of my mind for a long time, but I looked at it specifically, just a high-level look at how it checks the boxes for the UDOT criteria that were developed. Well, there's the UDOT criteria, and then within that, the 3 items that the last committee that worked on this came up with. And in my mind, the Spanish Valley multi-use pathway pretty much checks all the boxes. I only came up with 1 box that I couldn't really check off, and I'm sure greater minds than mine could do that. First, and I'll make this quick because I know we're way over time, but I do think it's important. Their first goal from UDOT was to reduce congestion. The 3 goals within that were establish and enhance travel choices. That's the first one. To me, that's a check and check on the boxes. Travel on Spanish Valley Road by bike or pedestrian really isn't an option if you want to do it safely. The second was improve operations and capacity. Again, check and check. With more development that's going up on Spanish Valley Drive, a shared use path would improve both of those. And I will add that I live about 3 miles south of town, very close to Spanish Valley. So I have ridden my bike in and out of town and way south of town. So I know that safety is a huge issue. I really hesitate to get on my bike because it is so unsafe in places. Third one was consistency with local community vision. This community has invested heavily in being a biking destination for tourism. And this is an additional step. I like to think of Park City and Kimball Junction. You can go all the way into Park City, riding, walking, jogging, riding a bike, walking or jogging all the way into Park City from Kimball Junction. And I think that's a great vision for this area. Spanish Valley is already an established path for multiple road biking events and foot races, but again, safety and user conflict is an issue. So the second UDOT goal was support economic development. First, by enhancing current and future economic activity in the corridor. As I mentioned above, it's already an established corridor for multiple activities. Getting a multi-use pathway would help to enhance those activities and support future activities in a safe way. The second was enhanced connectivity and access. There are many things south in Spanish Valley that would be way more accessible for user groups. The Arena, Mill Creek, Steel Bender, Ken's Lake, the LaSalle Mountain Loop Road. The third one was minimize friction among users. And again, having ridden that path many, many times, this is essential. Giving automobiles, bikers, walkers, runners their own space on Spanish Valley not only improves safety, but also minimizes conflict among the different user groups. The last category, the last big category, is increased recreation and tourism opportunity. Many of these overlaps, I've already mentioned it, but the first criteria under that area is enhanced visitor experience and opportunity. It almost goes without saying that both those things would be enhanced by improving access to the Spanish Valley corridor. Second was increase the number of year-round transportation options. That's the one I need a little help with. I can't figure out how that increases the year-round, but I'm sure maybe Kaylin or Evan could chime in on that. The third one was enhance access to recreation opportunities in the area. I've already discussed that and already discussed that it will not only enhance those, but will greatly increase safety for residents and visitors alike. So finally, I'll emphasize that this is an already established recreation and commuting corridor development is happening, that traffic and recreation is only going to increase. The project is ready to go, complete with story plans, story map plans, cost analysis, etc., and presented as part of a package. It enhances the Main Street parking plan by increasing user options, supporting economic development, reducing congestion, especially user friction, and increases safety for all user groups. That's all I have. I would love to hear input from Evan and Kaylin and anyone else that wants to talk.
Yeah, I think that was all pretty right on. I would echo all that, and rather than taking the time to do so, I'd be more curious to hear from other committee members, and specifically if there was any hesitation to include this, what that was, so that we could address that.
So the questions I have for you and really the committee is the primary feedback that I heard from UDOT about this project was that they felt like the northern portion of it was, relative enough to the criteria to be included. I don't know if you all heard that. That came from Rick Torgerson. So that given that question, I wondered, where do we draw that line? So there's that. Second thing is the concern about, and I know Evan, you've kind of responded to this before, but the concern about not having those easements through some of the private property in the context of splitting this thing, not necessarily in half, but kind of trimming down the scope to be the northern portion of this. How does that affect those areas where those easements are of concern? And then thirdly, can you remind me what the concept budget was for this in its entirety? And if we did trim it down, it'd be good to know how that would affect the budget.
I can take a stab at that. I don't have a lot of hard numbers right here at the tip of my fingers. Just as a reminder, there is that story map on the county website under the Community Economic and Development page. And unfortunately, we've had some turnover there. So there's a little loss of continuity with project leaders and that sort of stuff. But like Jaylyn was saying, this is pretty teed up and ready to go. So in terms of the right-of-ways, I think we had highlighted maybe 3 that were the main concern. And, this is America, and you throw money at it and the problems go away. So besides those 3, it's kind of like everybody else is on board. There's a lot of community support for this project. As there's new development that's going on out there, they are required to facilitate for this. And so I'm trying to flip through the story map and see if there's a cost summary. But
sorry, I know we have all that information. I didn't intend to kind of put you on the spot. I think those are like the key questions that we need to kind of comb through before we kind of make that final vote on the projects we want to kind of put forward. Those are just the key questions in my mind that I think we need to address, just an FYI.
Yeah. And I apologize. I'm going to have to peel out here in a minute. I need to meet a client at noon, but I think that it's pretty low hanging fruit here. And I think that it would be the most effective as a total package. So I think that, connecting to the arena, to downtown, allowing for other transportation, even getting to schools and activities like that for the kids, you know, people being able to access the golf course and stuff without having to jump in a car is good. And I think that there'd be some recognition for non-car centric transportation options. And I think that would be a big win for UDOT as well, to kind of be able to say that they're supporting these quote unquote alternative transportation options. And you know, one thing that wasn't mentioned was the proximity to the USU campus. And so I think that there will be a lot of benefits that come from that campus being more connected as well.
The other thing that I would just add quickly is, in my mind, this would represent a great partnership between UDOT and the community, because as far out as Rim Village, there is a development going up there, and they are required, as Evan said, to build that portion of the path through their development, the development that is contiguous of Spanish Valley Path out there. So not completely on our own to do this. And so it's a great project. My one question, I hesitate to even ask this because I may not want to know the answer, but regarding those 3 right-of-ways that are not quite obtained yet, would this hotspot funding money, this is a question for UDOT, would it be an appropriate use of the budget, whatever budget may be allocated, to buy those easements? Not that I want to go that way, but I just want to get all the options out there.
And just sorry, before we get an answer to that, just an asterisk on that is those easements we're looking for is for the dream path. And so obviously we do have a right of way there. It would just kind of be like a bike lane instead of a separated path. And so these few easements are once again just for the dream model, and they wouldn't necessarily shut down the feasibility of the project. It just would kind of mean, you know, bumping back out onto the existing blacktop for a section. But yeah, can we get some easements?
So just, I don't know that I'm going to give you obviously the final answer on that, but the costs associated with the right-of-way to make that a completed project, I think needs to be on the table. And that would be a factor in the decision-making, approval process, if I think is to get that project approved, and Monty's going to be able to speak to that better. I think we need to know what are the obstacles, what are to preventing this project from moving forward. It's one thing to get a cost estimate for a path from point A to point B, but the right of way associated with that is obviously and has been, in talking with Zachariah in the past, has been a major factor in both improving Spanish Valley Drive as a pedestrian active transportation path, as well as the facility itself for vehicular traffic. I think, understanding what those limitations are, I don't believe UDOT would fund that if there was not a plan to make it a completed project.
So just some process questions that I think we should kind of wrap our minds around is I think it's clear that we need some additional discussion on these projects, these additional projects that we're considering. But I think it would be good if we had established a time frame for when we actually want to make like final decisions on what those proposals are and how much work needs to happen prior to that decision. So with the multi-use pathway, you know, that was already a baked cake going into this process, but again, the feedback of it is appropriate. And so we do need to address that, whether we want to acknowledge that or not, and how that ties into downtown, and what the cost is. And I do think the committee and the city council and county council, if we are going to be recommending that project or including that in our package, that we're aware of like those loose ends, like those, you know, those right-of-way issues or issues with easements and whatnot, because it's important. So do we want to, since we have all the information on that project, you know, do we want to try to finalize our vote on that, like the vote for the package of projects like mid-October, late October? Do we want to wrap that up closer to November 1st? You know, what are our thoughts on that when the final vote's going to take place? So the way I have this in my mind is we flush out all the due diligence, we have all the information on all the projects in front of us, and then we need to go in and with an action item, and I'll entertain a motion to basically approve a package of projects. But until we get to that point, we need to make sure that we get all these questions answered. Does that process work for everyone? Are you guys looking to like sign off projects one by
I think your total max headroom?
Because we need to agree to a
Hey, you're losing it. Your connection went bad.
I'm back, I think.
Okay. I would be okay with a mid-October action item to determine what's being moved forward, and then that will give us a little bit of time to put a ribbon and a bow on what we're submitting in November.
Okay. So at the next discussion item for the multi-use pathway, we'll have all that material on hand and in the packet, and then we can kind of do some screen share and just work through what outlying questions are left. Does that sound good to you guys?
Yeah, and
Guys
if between now and then, if there's anything else from the committee about, you know, questions or loose ends or things like that you want to have highlighted, you know, the more questions we can answer in that process going into it, the better than, you know, saving the questions for the next meeting.
Hey, Curtis, I have one question. This is logistics. If we need to have our project package to UDOT by November 1st, do we need to, I mean, we gotta have time for both councils to give their thumbs up prior to that date, do we not? So we might want to bump the timeline up a bit.
I actually like the idea of going in and telling them they have to agree because they're out of time.
Fair enough.
Kidding, not kidding, but it's up to you all what you want to do there.
We could do a joint meeting, like right after the meeting that you have, so it's not, you know, we're not waiting for the regular council meetings, which can make things, you know, just logistically difficult. So we have like a joint meeting.
Okay, good idea.
And if you're doing it in October,
that sounds
maybe a week later after you all meet and sort of make your recommendation, we could do that.
okay. We're cutting into hunting season with these timelines, but I love this committee so much that we're just going to do what we have to do. Can we move on to Karen touching on public transit planning efforts? Or is everyone ready to move off of the shared use pathway? We're going to discuss that at our next meeting. So, okay, Karen, do you want to touch on any kind of transit planning efforts that we may or may want to consider for our package of projects?
You're muted, Karen.
unmute. Okay, I'm on 4% on my computer. So the proposed transit system. So this is the idea of trying to move something forward and you know, trying to hit the boxes with congestion, economic development, access and connectivity, and tourism and rec opportunities. So number one is to maximize the ability of Grand County citizens to reach any business as a customer or employee without having to drive. To enable the guests of our community staying at hotels and campgrounds to access the business in the county without having to clog the streets with additional vehicles. 3, reduce noise and pollution. 4, reduce distracted, intoxicated driving. 5, serve all serving all existing residential areas that benefit lower income families and individuals. 6, expand the access to town for low income development in the Spanish Valley by enabling those with reliable transportation to reach businesses in town from more affordable areas out to the city center. So I see this transit as a phased system where like phase 1 would be the Main Street, the Highway 191 corridor. And you know, it was difficult trying to, first I reached out to staff and I didn't hear anything back from planning. I was hoping to be able to, you know, work some ideas through with them. Hopefully we still can if this is, you know, a possibility, but not knowing what the budget is with the side street parking. I mean, we could go from having, you know, a Mac Daddy system to something very, very simplified. And so it's kind of difficult not knowing what the budget potentially could be. I reached out to shuttle companies, and there is interest locally to utilize vehicles that we already have in the community, and where we could also enable local businesses to, you know, to offer an evening shuttle system. And then Monty hooked me up with Tammy Bostick with Utah Clean, Utah Clean Cities. And she's very, very interested. They just implemented a pilot program in Zion, and it's called EV Zion. And so it's an electrified transportation system, and UDOT is a partner with them on that project as well. And so there's possibilities. I just don't know. I mean, I don't have a planning department that is, or a transportation department that we can, you know, present a project the same as Zachariah's team did. And so it's really difficult as myself as an individual trying to, you know, work this out, not knowing like what the budget is at all. So I mean, we could do anything from an Uber-fied system where we are using smaller vehicles to, you know, shuttle buses, you know, trying to do a pickup for the North corridor up to Rim Village, Rim Vista. So I mean, I feel like I don't have the full project, and it was a little difficult to try to even know where to start.
Why don't we do this, if it's all right, Karen? Why don't we schedule kind of you and I schedule a meeting to kind of get together, and then, you know, we can even, you know, touch base with UDOT some more and see kind of what level of deliverable we would need, you know, to have that, you know, in an inclusion. Because I'm even thinking like, you know, a 3 to 5 pager, you know, that just kind of highlights a concept, you know, that, you know, without getting, I mean, we're not talking about a full-blown transit system, but just kind of what Monty it seemed like he had supported was the idea of pursuing like a hotel hopper type thing, kind of a light, you know, little shuttle system. So why don't we just keep kind of flushing that out and then just kind of plan to run that parallel with the discussion with the shared use pathway in 2 weeks and see what we can come up with and put forward to the committee. Because I think ultimately, you know, we have until that meeting in mid to late October to, you know, approve the package of projects. So that's really the goal line here. And let's just pull some of us together and kind of work on that some more and see what we can flush out. Because I think we've always been supportive of transit, but we've acknowledged that this hotspot process hasn't really provided the time and the space to really dig in when you consider that it's taken this entire time to do the off Main Street parking project, and we're still working on that. And the multi-use pathway came in a finished concept anyways. So it's just kind of been sitting on the shelf. And it wasn't until 2 months ago that transit was put back on the table, right?
Right. Right. And I mean, there is different levels. And so, I mean, it is just a matter of, you know, if we had the opportunity to, you know, to present, you know, a modified hotel hopper, I mean, it would definitely tick off a lot of the boxes that we are, you know, trying to alleviate for downtown. And it also would open up a wider discussion of, like, if there's some serious Main Street improvements that UDOT wants to see, it can happen, you know, more easily in conjunction with transit. So, yeah. And it's about that equitability. So, I mean, that's where I feel for businesses and for residents. So
let's just keep working on it. We can jump in. Mike's got a comment. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah, well, let me just add this much. I've always thought the transit system was a great idea. Karen and I proposed a variety of mini transits, hotel hoppers, and so forth, and they've always been torpedoed, not because they don't satisfy UDOT's criteria for funding, but because UDOT categorically has said we won't do operational funding. While the city had money to burn, so to speak, a couple of years ago, we could swing that easily. Now we can't. That's really been the showstopper in all this, and it really kind of annoys me, frankly, although I can't point any fingers personally at anybody, that UDOT won't consider that. I mean, so I would like to keep it on the drawing board just to, if eventually they see that it'd be a worthwhile investment, despite the fact it doesn't quite fit their disinclinement to do operational funding. Because other than that, I agree with Karen. I still think it's a great idea. I can, for example, see a small fleet of Uber taxis, all right, but they just have the City of Moab nameplate on the side, and they're oriented towards doing hotel hopping and that kind of thing. So I'd like to keep it on our radar screen.
Mike, we should all get together and keep working on this for the next, 2 to 4 weeks, see what we can come up with for that, that mid to late October deadline.
That'd be great.
Okay. Jalen, go ahead. You're on mute, Madam Hawks.
Okay. I think transportation options in terms of the shuttle are very important. I guess the question that I would want answered is, my hesitation has not been the shuttle in and of itself. It's been that there are 3 other transportation studies going on, and I haven't paid too much attention to them. I'm not on any of those committees. And so I'm not sure if they overlap with what this would be doing, but I would certainly want to know how this could fit into those studies. I think there's a local level, regional level, I don't know. Maybe somebody else has more knowledge than I do on that one, obviously. But in any case, that's a question I would have when we discuss it in a few weeks. How does it fit into the overall transportation planning efforts that are underway?
I don't have a response to that. I haven't really been keeping close tabs on the RTP stuff. So
I've been attending those meetings, and you know, the RTP, it will come out with a series of recommended projects that then would be eligible to be put on the state's sort of list for funding, a long-term list. And if we have an RTP and we list all of our priorities, then and if transit is one of the things that we all agree in the RTP is something that we need to pursue, then that makes it possible for us to receive UDOT and federal funding through UDOT funding for those kinds of things. And that process is moving forward. You know, we've identified we're talking about some trouble spots and talking about frontage road along Highway 191. And there are various things that are being discussed. And so that's kind of moving on its own course, and there will be some public input. I'm wondering if part of the hotspot funding, and this may not be possible, but if part of the hotspot funding could fund investigation or study into options for transit. In other words, could we get a hunk of money to help us study what the options are and what might be affordable? Because it's going to take, you know, Karen can't do it all, and I don't have really the time to put together, you know, a study on all of the options and what might be affordable for us and what might work best for us. I mean, that's kind of a big effort. Even if it's relatively simple, it still takes a fair amount of time. So I don't know if there would be any money available in this pot of money to help us pursue that.
Well, UDOT has been consistent. They don't want money going into planning. They want it going into projects. And that's been the difficult, you know, challenge for transit in this space is we don't have a project ready. The multi-use pathway has been 3 years in the making. The off Main Street parking has been nose to the grindstone, you know, this entire time. And so it's what level of transit that's acceptable and worth it do we want to pursue with this hotspot funding? It's not going to be the transit system that we dream of, that we ultimately want, you know, for the community. But is there a form of transit that relieves congestion that's attainable with the funding that's on the table that can be a short-term, you know, mitigation of congestion? If that doesn't exist, then we shouldn't worry about it. If it does exist, we got to figure that out in 4 weeks.
So is it possible though? I mean, Nora asked a fabulous question, and I know Monty, I mean, he sent an email and said that he's looking at different, you know, shuttle systems that could potentially work for Moab. I mean, we really are in a position that we need help. And you know, Robert, I don't know if you would be able to answer that. I mean, Jeff, I mean, he's amazing. We could use his help. I mean, is it a possibility?
I would just restate what Curtis already said. I've heard Monty say it a few times. This hotspot funding is not to be used for studying or planning purposes. That would, you know, other options to accomplish that would probably need to be pursued. And I would say that we need to have that, you need to have that discussion with Monty to see if there are other options out there that would assist to review that planning process. But I'm fairly comfortable in saying that the hotspot funding is not going to be able to be used for that.
And so, Curtis, it comes back down to, again, you know, when we talked about using the Spanish Trail Arena as a place that can be, you know, a large parking area for transit and a multi-use pathway. And I mean, it serves, you know, different purposes. And so, you know, that discussion halted because transit didn't seem like that was, you know, an option. And then those discussions stopped with, you know, oversized parking areas, but those are still going to be needed in the future. And, you know, and trying to deal with, you know, congestion. So
So we're kind of you're right. We're talking about two things. We're talking about a little hotel hopper, and now we're talking about a recreational trailer parking that we're actually intending to be amenable to future public transit. So if we want to spend the next 4 weeks drilling into that, we can do that, but we should probably make that decision. What I've heard Monty mention was the hotel hopper. They seem to feel like keeping tourist cars in the hotel parking lots is a pretty big win in terms of battling congestion. And so if there's a system that can facilitate that, bringing them from their hotels and dropping them off in certain places downtown. So there's that, and then there's the recreational trailer parking that always, really it seems intended to be like a future landing site for public transit. So we need to decide which path we want to go down of the two, if any, and then start going.
Okay.
So, and we don't have to do that. We can work on that outside of these meetings. We absent a quorum, but kind of prepare that stuff to be discussed by the committee in 2 weeks, and then the following 2 weeks. So I can probably engage more on that, help you with that, Karen. Mike seems like he's interested. We can kind of huddle back up with Monty and kind of go through that. Any other comments on that before we move on? Seeing none. So really the only other projects, we kind of touched on that, downtown improvements and just now the south recreational parking. And so not anticipating an action item there. We're on the next steps. Seems like next steps is to have a meeting to go over the enhanced scope of work for the off Main Street parking, which includes those 2 blocks and Emma Boulevard. We want to definitely look at cost. And I think ultimately, Chuck's committed to getting us a concept budget for that project. So there's that. There's a deeper dive into getting our questions answered on the multi-use pathway and potential public transit project. We're going to go over the modeling, the Main Street improvement modeling with UDOT. And I guess maybe continue our planning for those town homes, right? Does that sound good to everyone? Okay, appreciate everyone. Thanks for your patience, and we'll keep working through this stuff, get past the finish line.
Thank you, Curtis. Thank you, Carly. Everybody.
Well,
Thank you. Thanks, Robert. Jeff,
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Robert. Yeah.